Good afternoon, everyone, and I guess I have to say, how's it to, to those of you that knows what this means. So my story kind of starts last year. In July 2024, I walked into my honors class called Media and International Relations. I was the oldest in that class at the tender age of 30, because most of my classmates were around 23 and they were fresh from undergrad, right? So when I was engaging with them, what I noticed was not that they were ignorant, but there was almost a naivety to them, right? They were curious, they were passionate, but they hadn't really understood or dealt with real world weight of politics and policy in everyday life. So I had walked into that class obviously expecting, to learn about how traditional media influences global politics. But what I didn't expect, which is a testament to my great lecturer, is to discover how new forms of media, like podcasts and TikTok and even the age-old Twitter, had disrupted the old way of doing things. That class changed my life. It made me realize that as a young woman in South Africa, with a keen interest in politics and current affairs, that there was a gap that I could take. The only thing that I hadn't figured out is how I was going to exploit that gap. And so my answer came in January this year with what I thought was just a silly video. I was mocking, how South Africa and Rwanda were possibly going to go to war over the SANDF's peacekeeping mission in the DRC, excuse me. So what I did was I had assigned different cultural groups different military roles, right? So I said Xhosa people would be negotiators because we have the gift of the gab. I'd said Zulu and Afrikaans people would be on the front lines. I don't think I need to expand further. And I had said, that Sotho people would be strategists. And while the video was humorous and it explained something many South Africans didn't know, which is why were our soldiers in the DRC in the first place. And that made me question, where had traditional media missed the mark? And so that video went viral, but that's not what was important for me. It had taught me something more powerful, which is that South Africans were not just laughing, they were also keen to learn. So from there, I started breaking down complex issues. For example, why digital nomads weren't great for the economy, as the media had painted, and were actually causing a housing crisis in Cape Town. How the national budget affects ordinary people, and even the long history of India and Pakistan and their conflict, and how it was not just about cricket. In just 8 months, I have built an audience of 300,000 followers, hungry for accessible, thank you, who are hungry for accessible political content. And I'm obviously not alone. TikTok now has over 150 million users across Africa as of 2024. It's not just about entertainment, it's about politics, it's about sports, it's about culture and identity. It shows us that young people are not just scrolling mindlessly, they are searching for new ways to understand and engage this new world. And something crucial that I learned in the process is that access is everything. In South Africa, the average reading level is grade 8. Complex newspaper articles or parliamentary speeches simply don't land with most people. And when you find out that only 45% of South Africans say they trust traditional news fully, you start to see the crisis. My approach to help this issue is simple. Remove complex jargon, use everyday analogies like reality TV or football to make politics relatable. I'm probably one of the few people in my generation who still buys a Sunday newspaper, but I also realized that not everyone was raised how I was raised. Not everyone had a mom who bought both the Sunday Times and the City Press and made me read one of them back to front and then compare notes with her. And so that's where my role comes in now, about bridging that knowledge gap. And it matters to me that women, queer and non-binary creators are stepping into the space because traditional media has often silenced or stereotyped our voices. On platforms like TikTok, we create without asking permission. We build our own narratives in our own voices. But let me be transparent. Access is one thing, sustainability is another. So how do I make a living from this? How do I pay my team for my podcast? How do I keep showing up every day when traditional media has corporate ad budgets that I don't? It's privilege, and it's an earned privilege. Before this, I was an entrepreneur. I ran a marketing and events company, and this year I decided to sell my shares and invest everything into creating my media platform. That is the only reason I can stand here today and do what I do. I'm very fortunate to do so. But according to a 2023 report, the African creator economy is already worth over $100 million. But most creators still earn less than $200 a month from digital platforms. That tells you how fragile the space is. We are building something vital as the youth, but we need new funding models. We need partnerships, and we need recognition of our roles the roles that we play in shaping Africa's democracy. And obviously, with that sustainability comes a responsibility. I always stress, I am not a journalist, okay? It is a very serious job, and I have a profound respect for traditional media, because without them, I could not do what I do. I rely on their reporting and their fact-checking, but we have to ask ourselves, where has traditional media missed the mark? I also know that my voice carries influence, and in a country where 38% of the people are worried about false or misleading information online, I do not take that lightly. So I hold myself accountable. I avoid stories that I cannot verify, and sometimes that means staying silent when traditional media hasn't covered an issue. But sometimes it also means taking risks, like with the Justice for Cwecwe movement, where in the beginning, mainstream media was nowhere to be found. I chose to use my platform to bring awareness because my silence would have meant ignoring the cries of women and children. The tension between caution and courage is what defines what I do. And that's why it matters. When people understand how their budget is spent, by whom, they can vote with clarity. When they know where our soldiers are and what laws are being implemented, they can hold leaders accountable. That is democracy in practice. And so to conclude, I have to say that traditional media is struggling to adapt to a new world. Verbose language, coupled with poor access to education and economic inequality, means the average person cannot often understand what's happening around them. Media literacy is at an all-time low, not only in South Africa, not only in Africa, but globally. My role is not to take over from traditional media, but to supplement it and fill in the gaps. To give ordinary people access to information in a way that they can digest, debate, and use it to make better decisions. Because the more access people have to information, the stronger our democracy becomes. Ultimately, that is what I stand for. Not as a competitor to journalism, but as a collaborator in the work of keeping Africa's democracy alive. When people are informed, they can resist. When people are included, they can participate. And when people speak, democracy listens. Thank you.
That was absolutely brilliant. Thank you so much for your honesty. And my key takeaway from that is the tension between the courage and caution to build your own narratives. So thank you. Thank you for sharing your platform, for sharing your story with us and sharing this platform with us. So this tees us up to our next panel. And this is digging deeper into the unique ways young people are shaping the media for a more democratic future. I'd like to welcome on stage Ompha Tshamano, our moderator, and the panelists on stage, Lisa Muchangi, Asafika Mpako, and Christine Mungai. Welcome.
That's fine, that's fine. Alrighty. Good afternoon, everyone. How are you all? How are you feeling? Thank you, thank you. So today I'm joined by not only content creators, I call you guys content creators, but you guys are actually the grant makers. So in this session, as we've had, the voice or the youth are not necessarily here for inclusion. we're changing and transforming ways in which we consume media. And this is a result of the exclusionary nature of traditional media. So here, I'm joined by the transformative force, which is now shaping and changing media. So in this session, we will basically be exploring and unraveling how us as the audience, which is young people, are engaging with media and subsequently democracy. And in this session, I want to stress that media needs to be seen as the watchdog which supports democracy, and hence why in the title we have Voices for a Democratic Future. Because what we've noticed is whilst Africa has the youngest population, we are not necessarily included, but we've moved past the conversation of inclusion, and we are now going to take up space, whether you guys like it or not. We've heard about the sustainability issues that are arising, but in the sustainability issue as well as in tech conversations, voices of youth and marginalized communities tend to not be included. So in this instance, I hope you guys critically reflect on some of the things that you've done as our elders, so we need to respect you. But at the same time, we need you to also think of ways in which you can include us, not necessarily just as tokens, but as people who are personally responsible for the media. So to start off, I would like to go to Asafika, right? Given your data insights at Afrobarometer, can you kindly highlight the key trends in South Africa as well as in Africa on how us as young people engage with media and democracy? Subsequently, can you briefly share what these trends are revealing and offer insights into the why?
Thank you so much, Ompha, and a very good afternoon to you all. For the benefit of those of you in the audience who may be unfamiliar with Afrobarometer, allow me a bit of time to just talk briefly about the organization. So Afrobarometer is a pan-African, non-partisan survey research organization that provides reliable data on African experiences and evaluations on democracy, governance, and quality of life. This work has been going on since the year 1999, and to date we have completed 9 survey rounds in up to 42 countries across the continent. And why do we do the work that we do? Well, our goal is simple, and that is to give African citizens a voice in public policy processes and in decision-making across the continent. Now, to turn to your question on democracy and media, what our findings show is that young people on this continent want democracy, but they are disillusioned. So our findings show that more than 6 in 10 young Africans say that they prefer democracy to any other form of government. They reject military rule and they reject one-man rule. However, they are more likely than their elders to endorse a military takeover. But there's a caveat to this, and that is if elected leaders abuse power. Young Africans are also more likely than their elders to express greater dissatisfaction with the way in which democracy functions in their countries. So our findings show that less than 4 in 10 young Africans say that they are either fairly satisfied or very satisfied with the way that democracy works in their country, and there's about 6 in 10 who say that they are not at all satisfied or not very satisfied with the way that democracy works in their country. And at the top of young people's concerns are, of course, unemployment, issues to do with healthcare, the increasing cost of living, and education. And we also find that young people, compared to their elders, are just not at all pleased with the status quo. And as a result, they participate less in civic activities. So they are less likely to vote. They are less likely to identify with a political party. They are less likely to attend community events. They are less likely to contact members of parliament or to contact any other political party official. And also, they are less likely to join others in efforts to build advocacy around a common issue. But there is an exception, and that is in the area of political of protest participation, pardon me, and in social media activism. So what our findings show is that young people are more likely than their elders to take to the streets, and they are more likely to say that they posted about politics or social media or community affairs on social media. So that's where we find the exception. And also, what is important to note is that this is, of course, what we see emerging in the data. And I think that what it shows us is two things. One, that these trends are emerging because of the unmet promises of democracy. African governments have failed to deliver on the economic promise for young people, and that has led to immense disillusionment and to weakened faith in democracy. Second, there's the issue of the structural marginalization of young people. As we know, traditional political systems tend to relegate young people to the margins of society. And what that results in is young people's limited engagement in formal institutional channels. And so, as I close, I think that it's important that we start to adopt new and inclusive and responsive frameworks that genuinely create space for young people and for gender diverse voices, and that will mean economic responsiveness, that will mean creating meaningful channels for engagement, and it will mean having ongoing dialogue so that we can create systems where democracy works for everyone and not just a select few.
All right. Thank you so much, Asafika, for that. We understand that unemployment is one of the hugest problems within the context of Africa, and specifically that affects us as African young people. So I'll go to you, Lisa. So you at Baraza Media Lab are known to drive innovation as well as support content creators and media professionals. So based on that, you guys also released a report today. I'll leave the title to you. You'll explain more to that. So just a brief synopsis of what the report covered. The report explored the evolving influencer marketing landscape in East Africa, and it provided insights into consumer behaviors, as well as content creators' dynamics and emerging trends. So with that question, understanding that unemployment is somewhat influencing how we, one, interact as well as participate within the digital economy. How has that been reshaping the media landscape in East Africa? Maybe we can learn more lessons from you from there in East Africa, and what are the implications for youth and gender diverse creators and media professionals in seeking and as well as telling authentic journalistic stories?
Okay. Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. As he's mentioned, we as Baraza released a report on the state of influencer marketing in East Africa. We surveyed over 1,500 participants from Kenya, Uganda, and Tanzania. And most of them, of course, were under the age of 30, so really the demographic for that influencers target with their work and brands as well. And one of the key findings that emerged from this is that the current currency that exists within the influencer marketing space is trust. So now, I'm going to give a few definitions here in the context for that applies in this case, is when it comes to trust, trust is defined as the confidence audiences have placed in a voice to inform them accurately, responsibly, and in ways that align with their lived experiences. So when we surveyed these young people, it emerged that they are leaning more towards and rewarding the creators and influencers who focused on authenticity. Right, so being authentic, and those ones who are not just promoting, brands and products, etc. And how we saw this play out recently I think as many of you might be aware, we had the nationwide protests in 2024 against the proposed finance bill. And of course, what followed was the anniversary of that protest this year. And what emerged clearly was that audiences gravitated towards the influencers and the creators who used their platforms to champion civic work. So they used their platforms to basically amplify, information on digital safety during the protests, on how to navigate the protest as well, because this was a very interesting new time for Kenyans across the country. So for this, what this also taught us is when it comes to the creators who are doing significantly well, are the ones who use their platforms authentically. So they were not tone deaf during that particular period, where you're promoting products at the same time you're not basically talking about what is happening around the country. Yeah. So that was one of the biggest lessons that emerged from that. And another additional thing is we've seen a rise of what we're calling niche experts. So, for example, the voices that are being trusted the most are the ones who they've got a background, let's say, for example, a medicine background, but they're using their platforms to break down information in a way that is digestible and easily accessible. We've seen this in vernacular. We're seeing vernacular in rural TikTokers. We've seen this also with now news influencers as well, who are using the knowledge and insights that they have and breaking it down in a way that is digestible for their local audiences.
All right, thank you so much. I'll just ask you to touch on how journalism can somewhat build and learn from these developments.
Yeah, so a couple of things. I think what we've seen is there are a lot of creators who are generally treated as their job is to amplify the work of newsrooms. But we see that there is a need to bring them in closer and be part of co-creation, right? So not necessarily that your job is to amplify what a story we've released, because they have a better understanding of what their audiences care about. They engage, and what they've created around themselves are communities, not just followers, right? So I think that's one thing that we could consider. And of course, another thing that journalism could borrow from this is engagement. So adapting the formats that they use to be a bit more interactive. When you look at a beauty influencer, the way they talk to their audience on Instagram is very collaborative and very inviting. It's not top down, right? So for example, they'll ask them, there'll be Q&As, they give them a chance to share their opinions on polls, something as simple as what skincare issues are you facing? It's something that feels more inviting, and they invite them into their lives, so they feel that, so the audiences feel that they are, whatever opinions they have, whatever insights they have are valued and they're cared for. So I think those are one of the ways that could be, yeah.
All right, thank you so much, Lisa. I'll now go to Christine, and before I start, all protocol observed. So those who know will know what I mean. So we understand that digital platforms are somewhat reshaping how we tell stories, right? And you guys at the continent have been doing great work, which is commendable, based on, but based on how the media landscape is changing and how viability is now an issue. You guys have been really thriving. So maybe we can just clap hands before we proceed. But the continent's model has been disrupting traditional media gatekeeping, right? We have heard about how content creators should be used to amplify voices. How has this networked approach structured and facilitated inclusion and empowerment of young and gender diverse journalists as well as media professionals?
Thank you for that question. I'm a little bit, very slightly hesitant to speak for the youth because as a millennial, we are starting to age out of that bracket. I'm sorry, guys, it's true. I'll tell you how you know. Let me tell you how. If you're walking down a flight of stairs and you stand on the second last stair and you can't jump down without hesitating, you're aging out, guys. If you have to think about it. Yeah, this thing is on a clock now. But I have to say, when I joined the newsroom many eons ago, there was a website called Newspaper Death Watch.
I don't know if you guys remember that website. It was tracking the death and the closure of newspapers in North America. And within the first 3 months of joining the newsroom, starting my career, I was made aware of this website called Newspaper Death Watch, which is to say that the media has been declining the entirety of my career. Print has been dying, journalism has been dying the whole time that we've been doing this work. Yeah? And I would say in some ways, it makes us as millennial journalists philosophers, because we have lived with pessimism our whole lives. Any millennial journalist here, knows Albert Camus, Schopenhauer, Kierkegaard. You can say all these things. But what I would say about that is that living with absurdity with pessimism in our bones, basically makes us lean into the absurdity. That there's loss all around us anyway, so what's the harm in doing something crazy? And I think that's the origin story of the continent. It's a publication that chose to do something unbelievable in 2020, which is to forego a website, to forego SEO optimization, to forego being visible to algorithms, and to create a newspaper, like an old school print product with 2 columns. And then to deliver that on WhatsApp, on a digital platform, which you can't place ads on, which every single newspaper has to be forwarded to another person organically. And so our audience, even though you can take that number of 31,000 subscribers, those 31,000 subscribers are very different in quality to 30,000 or 31,000 subscribers on a website. It's because for them to get that paper, another person forwarded it to them. And for the entirety of the time that the continent has been publishing, we've always said, forward this to someone you think will appreciate good African journalism. And so the continent has never been beholden to all the big forces that we talked about here. Of course, it has cost the publication a lot, which is, number one, the granular data on the nature of your audience, which in some ways is a form of power and currency. But that was a conscious decision. It was a trade-off that was made early on, because if you're going to get your subscribers to be forwarding this newspaper that is created by humans and distributed one person at a time, then that's the cost of being on the platform WhatsApp. But the reason why the distribution initially is, started out there is because WhatsApp is the place that we are all spending so much time on already. If you look at your phone battery data, it tells you which app is open the most and is eating up the most of your battery. And for me and for most of the people in this room, I'm sure WhatsApp is number one, if not at least in the top 3. So audiences are already there. The eyeballs are already there. So why not bring that quality African journalism into the place where the eyeballs already are, instead of dragging them into your website? So I would say that would be what being in this digital landscape looks like. It's a very odd and strange combination of a very old school format delivered in this new way on this digital platforms. And now we also distribute on Signal. We have email subscribers, and then we have the folks who read us on Substack.
Yeah, okay. Thank you so much, Christine, for that. Are you allowed? Can you share the stats of your audience? Who's your main audience?
So our main I don't know if I can really say main subscribers, because we have subscribers in every single country in Africa and in 160 countries around the world. There is someone in some country somewhere in the Pacific that actually receives the continent. So I think that's one of the things that I would say I'm really proud to be associated with this publication, because of the the scale of the reach, and also with how loyal our subscribers are. In the 5 years that the continent has been publishing, like I said, we've acquired 31,000 plus subscribers, but only about 2,500 have ever unsubscribed. That's a churn rate of like 4%, which is something that if you're publishing on our website, you know how much the drop-off rate typically is on your website. So I would say that the loyalty of our subscribers and how deeply they engage with the newspaper, about a third of them say that they read every single issue back to back, cover to cover. That's 30 pages of like the first 9 pages is like all the news and like all the heavy hard stuff. And then, you know, the other 2/3 of the newspaper is like very visual. We do a lot of photo essays. We do a lot of commissioned art. Just 2 weeks ago, we ran a comic as the cover story. So I would say that really interesting and dynamic things are happening within that PDF format, within that bundle, that I think our readers and our subscribers appreciate. And lastly, out of those 31,000 subscribers, each subscriber on average forwards this newspaper to 4 or 5 people every single week. So you can do the math. We have this newspaper read by over 100,000 people, many of whom just rely on a friend or a family member or a professional colleague to send this newspaper to them. Many of our subscribers are like super forwarders of this publication. And I would say that the average reader of the continent, especially the ones who have been there from the beginning or have recently discovered us, are really passionate about getting it to someone else's WhatsApp.
All right, thank you so much. So from the provocation up until the panel discussion, information sharing and the way in which we share the information has somewhat been emanating from the conversation. So given your different entry points, we have data, we have influencer marketing, and then we have innovative journalism. What strategies can be deployed? What strategies should be applied to ensure that there's somewhat improvement in journalism? I know it's a very loaded question, but hopefully you guys, we can strategize and workshop.
Yeah, maybe I'll go first since I am the journalist here among us. So I think I would say that we should do the work that makes us proud. And that seems like a very simple and simplistic statement, but I think I've spent enough time in newsrooms where the stories being published are not actually for the purpose of being proud of the product at the end of the day. It's to serve some kind of invisible algorithmic monster that can never be satisfied, yeah? And so we keep on trying to contort ourselves into different shapes so that we can be visible and so that we can win this, this battle that threatens to kill us. But like I said at the beginning, if your whole career has been in the shadow of newspaperdeathwatch.com, then I think with that looming in the background of all of our professional lives as millennial journalists, then what is the proper response in such a context? It's to do the absurd. It's to do the thing that makes you proud of the work that you do, that creates impact and creates change. Even in the light of all these pressures that are pushing us in different directions. What I'm trying to say is that it really takes courage. It takes courage to make these hard decisions and to make these trade-offs that you know very well are going to cost you and are going to make you lose out on the race. But sometimes you just sit back and you have to ask yourself, people talk about the rat race, but then you have to ask, am I a person or am I a rat, is the question. Why are we talking about rats? Can we be people instead? And that way when we, if you don't have like a seat at the table, if you don't have a seat at the table, sometimes you can just make, small talk, cocktail talk outside instead and make it, the better option. What I'm trying to say is that we have to create those oases for ourselves, those alternatives for ourselves, and also ask the questions that will reset the table, reset the room, that we don't have to work within the frameworks that have been handed down to us. And we can just do what makes us happy instead.
All right.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
All right. Do you have any other contributions
Yeah.
from the floor? Okay.
I would say, so using the continent's example, actually, and thank you for sharing those insights with us. The continent has a very deep understanding of their audience, right, and their behavior. And I believe that when I look at like creators, it's pretty much the same thing. They have a deep understanding of their audiences, how they want to be communicated to, what their interests are, what they don't like, what they don't agree with. And for me, what I would say is, why not have journalism treat creators as credible contributors and not just necessarily amplifiers? So how do you work with creators to tell stories to their audience in the way that they want to be told these stories? So not the way you feel, I want to publish it this way. Because if the goal is engagement, then you cannot, and not necessarily like notice board information, you have to tailor the stories to what these audiences care about. And creators are the pathway to that.
All right. Thank you so much for that, Lisa. Asafika?
I'll start off by saying that I'm really proud and delighted to be on the same panel as someone from the continent, because with someone from the continent, because Afrobarometer publishes weekly in the continent. So I think that is one of our success stories, because we are in the business of amplifying citizen voices, and we want to make sure that African voices are reflected in public policy making processes. Partnerships are really at the heart of what we do, and I'd really like to stress the point that was made earlier about the value of partnerships and collaboration. And for those of us who work in this field, I know that we are often criticized for working in silos, and that we don't make enough of an effort to find those touch points where we can come together for a common purpose or for a common goal. And I think that Afrobarometer is doing well in trying to build up partnerships. For instance, through our Data for Governance Alliance project, we have brought on board Pan-African civil society organizations that we capacitate to be able to effectively analyze and interpret the Afrobarometer data so that they can amplify citizen voice. And we also train journalists also to be able to interpret and analyze the Afrobarometer data so that they too can use the data to be able to amplify citizen voices in their news reporting. So I really think that the point that has been made already in the two previous panels about collaboration, the power of community, of finding your people, I know that that's become very popular today, is a point that deserves to be stressed over and over and over again, because I think that there really is great power in that.
All right, thank you. So I just have a question for the journalists in the room. So we understand that the media landscape is now shaped by algorithms, monetization, and virality. So how do we ensure that youth-led journalism remains rooted in public interest as compared to performance metrics?
That's a really tough question. That's a really tough question. How do we do the work that's in the public interest versus performance metrics? Okay. I feel like I've talked about that. Maybe I've touched on it a little bit earlier. But I would say that this panel has the title Voices for a Democratic Future, and we started off by talking about democracy. I think one of the ways we can do that is to clarify our thinking on what democracy is, on what our civic spaces are, and on what we owe each other. A lot of times, this idea of, as journalists, our main focus is the deadline. Once we've met the deadline, the story is published, and it ends up being a very fragmented and broken way of handling information, that it just exists in this finite and very controlled space called, the deadline. And then after that, the deadline is met and it's, we've published, it's done. But I think we all know that audiences really desire a sense of what next, what happened after this. You told us last week that X was bombed, then what happened? Then there was a landslide, then what happened? So I think there is an opportunity to be very, very focused on picking up the pieces of yesterday's story. And not everything has to remain in the news cycle forever, right? There's a point where it tapers off. But I think in many instances, we drop stories too quickly. Yeah, we drop them too quickly. And we're not able to close the loop on some of these things. That we present issues as debates sometimes, that, we have one person saying one thing and the other person saying the opposite thing, and then that's it. We've just presented, two opposing views, and then sometimes we even end with, a sentence that says, "Only time will tell." But I think we do have a responsibility to our audiences to close that loop and to not leave them in limbo with what this event ended up creating or what happened after. Yeah.
Right. Thank you so much. I wanted to ask you another question, but I think we are running out of time. So I'll open the floor to the room if you have any questions. Okay, cool. Thank you. So we'll start with Paula.
So thank you very much, Ompha, for bringing the real innovation panel to our conference, although I'm feeling 150 years old. I wanted to ask you, first of all, Lisa, Christine, I think, can you elaborate on your business model? I've opened the continent. I've seen it's really beautiful. Can you elaborate on what's your business model? And then also, I would like to ask you, Lisa, there's an important distinction in journalism between opinion and reporting. How do you address that when it comes to influence?
Maybe let's go with Lisa first.
So before we answer, Kem?
Thank you so much, Ompha. My name is Nkem Agonwa from Witness, and I work with communities to use video and technology for human rights. This panel has been so insightful, and the continent's, this is to Christine.
Yes.
The continent's approach is radically, in my opinion, changing what we understand about media consumption patterns. Because what you have described is delivering news in traditional print format, in PDF, and distributing that on WhatsApp. And this reminds me of the time when there was a heavy push towards short-form video as the present and the future, and then we saw the tide go in the direct opposite, with consumers favoring long-form videos. Now we're at a point where more and more people are looking towards generative content as a way in which they consume news. And I'm just curious to know how you respond to that. Do we continue adopting as the shifting landscape continues to evolve?
All right.
I'll let Lisa go first. You can have her first.
Yeah. So that's a very, very good question, because I think, especially during the time when we had our protests in Kenya, there were a lot of opinions and a lot of feelings, regardless of whether you are a content creator or you're just a user of these apps. And I think what we've seen are, I think I mentioned earlier about the rise in more like specialized content creators. So for example, we've seen those in the medical field, where they're basically their job is maybe like their day job is that they're a doctor, but they also use their platform and their voice and their audiences to inform their audiences of things that are happening within for example, like if there's an outbreak, etc. Right? So I think the bit about opinions, it would be like, this is how I feel about this event, versus reporting on actually something that's happening, right? I think the examples that I've also seen are, there's some political content creators who use their platforms to basically, inform people of, this is what, for example, the proposed finance bill, how this would implicate your work, for example, if you're in the creative space. So I think the difference there is in how it is packaged. There are those who it is more like an opinion, and others it is actually stating the facts, and they allow their audiences to interpret that on their own. Yeah.
Okay, thank you so much for that.
And just to add on to that, sometimes when you're just explicit about your position, then the audience has no problem with you opinionating, or at least even having a tone or a voice. And that's really that's what content creators have that journalists sometimes over-suppress, that you read a piece and you ask yourself, wow, was there a human being behind this? They obviously have a voice, but I'm not seeing it anymore. And that's one of the things that I've always loved about the continent from the beginning, is the voice is always there. You can feel the person behind this because of the irreverence, the snarkiness, the sarcasm, the tone is very much alive. Yeah. But to go to your question on business models, the continent is free. We don't charge our readers for that PDF. But how do we pay our bills? It's through fundraising, through donor funding. And of course, the next thing is that you would say is, well, is that really sustainable? Is that really a business model? But to that, I would say that people with money, the funders and donors, are already spending money on so many things all the time. There are things that just keep getting refunded, always. So since the money is already being spent and being allocated, I think our job is just to capture a small amount of what goes to training, capacity building, literacy, digital literacy things. And at the continent, we say we don't even have to have all the money. We don't need the whole thing. We don't need the whole pot, yeah? Just a small fraction of that keeps our small team going. The continent has actually limited its ambition in terms of growth simply because of that. The work that it takes to now, have to hire more people, have to go to more things, because what we do well is putting together a newspaper, and that's what we want to keep doing. And I want to tie it to the question at the back about the different formats that are coming and how do you stay above that? I think I'll give a very direct answer to that, which is just do the work that you want to do, not the one that you feel that you have to do. Because I believe that if you genuinely want to put together a podcast, if that is something that drives you and keeps you up at night, if there's a story that only you can tell, if there's something that this is the reason why it has to be a podcast, then really that energizes you to look for the funding, to keep going in the face of trials and tribulations, which are always there. But if you're pivoting to video because Facebook told you, or some media report said this is the new hot thing, then you really don't have the reserves to like actually follow through with it, which is why I see a lot of media houses like picking up and dropping things all the time. And I'm like, why did you launch this thing again? Why did you launch it again? And I know that folks in the room could have like different opinions about that, about like how you can try different things and like have your foot in different places. But sometimes you just like have to sit back and cut your coat according to your cloth, do what you can, and like just do it excellently. Like give it the best that you ever can do, and be so good that when people refer to that thing, they're talking about you, you know. But to actually put something together takes a heck of a lot of time and investment, and you just can't be half-hearted about it. If you want to start doing TikToks, my God, go and do the best TikToks that have ever been done. You know, I just believe in who's thinking about TikTok. So just like it can't be like a half-assed thing about it. You can't be half-hearted about this business, because like death is around the corner. You know, you're more likely to fail than to succeed. Why not just like give it your all? You know.
Thank you so much, Christine. We can definitely see the pessimism that you were talking about. So, Zoe, then, okay, cool. Sorry, guys, we only have about 5 minutes. Kurote is the host. Can I? Okay. Zoe, Khadija, and then we can go to Richard and Tandiwe. I've noted Guy and...
Thank you, Ompha. My question is to Asafika. I follow the Afrobarometer very closely. Your surveys are very, very important, and they're very, very, very rich data. And we really appreciate the work that you do to develop the capacity of journalists, especially around data journalism. But I want to lean into another area of work that we engage in, youth political participation. And then to touch on something that you said earlier is, and I agree with you, the youth is showing up differently, leaning towards online activism and so forth. And that you speak about a lack of trust in, traditional institutions, and that, the youth don't really go to the polls. But interestingly, in Namibia last year for our 2024 elections, there was huge turnout by the youth. The problem is, though, that our electoral commission doesn't provide disaggregated data. So we don't know how the youth vote actually influenced the elections. But going back to something that you mentioned earlier, you talked about online advocacy, digital advocacy. I'd like to know if you are looking more closely, and I know it's very difficult because you look at comparative analysis as well over a period. To what extent would you be willing to change or look more into how online advocacy is actually delivering impact in terms of public policy and youth activism?
Thank you so much, Zoe. Khadija?
I wanted Christine to talk a little bit about the continent's publishing breaks. Because I think so often when we think about reinventing journalism, think about the crisis facing journalism, we often disregard workers' rights and the fact that journalists are workers. And when we think about creating new journalisms for the future, the one thing that we often disregard is thinking about creating better working conditions for journalists. And I think that the continent's publishing pauses, or I think you call it, are one way of ensuring that your journalists are treated as human beings, and that their own interests and their ability to look more deeper into stories is actually protected. And I think that's something crucial we have to consider when we think about reframing journalism for the future. I'd love you to tell us more about that and how that actually has had an impact on the quality of your work.
All right. Can we make it very brief? Thank you.
Oh, okay. Thank you so much for that question. Yeah, I think so. I must say first that Afrobarometer's signature topics are democracy and governance. But over the years, this work has been going on since 1999, as I said. Over the years, we have expanded to look at other pressing matters on the continent. And these include issues to do with gender-based violence, gender equality, climate change, police brutality. So we're constantly expanding to investigate Africans' experiences and evaluations of how their governments are doing in relation to all of these topics. So we do have a standard questionnaire that we have used and modified slightly since 1999. And within that questionnaire, we also make space for what we call CSQs, or country-specific questions. And there we allow space for the national partner in a particular country to develop questions that are topical at any particular time so that those can be investigated during that period. So I can hook you up with or get you in touch rather with our national partner in Namibia, because we also run consultative processes where we engage civil society partners and other development partners to understand what they think may be important to include as part of those country-specific questions. So for sure, I think that we're going to continue to investigate youth issues, how the digital space is impacting on youth political participation, and I'd be very happy for you and your organization to get involved in that work in Namibia. Thanks so much.
Christine, very shortly.
Okay, so I'll be quick. The continent publishes approximately 40 editions a year. So there are 52, we're a weekly, but we don't publish 52 issues in a year. We approach it like the way when you're watching your Netflix season. The season 1, it's 10 episodes, it goes away for some time. A few months later, season 2 drops. So it's the same kind of idea that we publish 10 or so weeks, and then we go away for 3 weeks. We still get paid throughout the year. So these publishing breaks are literally just to go and be a human. So 2 weeks of just like doing nothing, and then 1 week of planning and reflection, which brings me back to that question of courage. As a journalist, being present when things happen, responding to the breaking news is like the main thing that we were trained to do. Like, how do you make the decision to abandon big stories for 3 weeks, 4 times a year? It's because of what Khadija is saying, that journalists are workers, and you need to structurally create a framework in which people are not burning out and that they can always give your best. If we're not going to be half-hearted about the work that we do, then we have to build in rest. And the risk of that is that we risk being on break when something big happens. Oh my God, what are we going to do? But the reality is that something else will happen when we come back. Like, there is never a shortage of like big stories or breaking news. If a president dies when we are on break, another one will die when we are not on break. Like, it's just normal. Life goes on. And in the meantime, as journalists, we can just be humans. We can go and do all our government paperwork during the break, take our kids for picnics, just like be normal people as the big things are happening.
All right. Thank you. We are sadly out of time. But yeah, Toyota has risen. But thank you so much for listening.